Welcome in, everybody, to this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's amazing we have like this real life space drama unfolding right now. It's kind of a mix of like, astronaut adventure, but then also like down to earth politics.
Yeah, it is. It really is remarkable how something like a routine crew rotation for the International Space Station, becomes like front page news.
Right. Exactly. So we're going to set the scene for everybody listening. NASA astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, they are finally coming home after an unexpectedly extended stay aboard the ISS.
Ah,
And I'm telling you, the reasons for this delay are a lot more complex than I think a lot of people would think.
yeah, it's not just like, a rescheduled flight. You have to consider the logistics of space travel, the stakes, and how each decision, has ripple effects across tons of missions.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack this. Give us like a quick overview of the missions that are kind of all wrapped up in this Crew-9, Crew-10.
Okay, so Crew-9, that include Williams Wilmore, Nick Hague, and Alexander Gorbunov. They've been on the ISS for a while now. Crew-10, the relief crew, consists of Anne McClain, Nicole Ayers, Takuya Onishi, and Kirill Peskov. They launched successfully last Friday evening on a SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule.
Ah, SpaceX. So
Yeah.
that's where Elon Musk and all this like political buzz comes in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Crew-10's launch was supposed to happen on Wednesday, but it got scrubbed because of a technical issue with the launch pad's ground systems.
Mhm.
But SpaceX, they fixed it and launched successfully a couple of days later, which, that's pretty normal in spaceflight.
Right.
Happens all the time.
But this little delay, caused a media frenzy with words like stranded and abandoned being thrown around a little dramatic, don't you think?
I think so. And the astronauts themselves have even kind of pushed back against this whole narrative. Wilmore even gave a statement to CNN. He said, "Help us change the narrative. Let's change it to prepared and committed despite what you've been hearing."
Yeah. That's a pretty clear message.
Yeah.
But okay, before we get into like all the political stuff, I think we have
Yeah.
to, understand why Williams and Wilmore were on the ISS for so long in the first place. Their mission started back in June, right?
It did. Yeah. They were actually part of Boeing's Starliner capsule's first crewed test flight, but
Yep.
the mission ran into multiple technical issues, so they had to stay on the ISS way longer than anyone planned.
Can you elaborate a little on those technical issues? I'm sure our listeners, they're probably space buffs.
Yeah.
What exactly happened with the Starliner?
Well, one of the biggest problems was with the propulsion system. The Starliner uses these thrusters to move around in space, right? And some of them malfunctioned. On top of that, they found helium leaks, which, that's super dangerous because helium is what they use to pressurize the fuel system.
That sounds really scary.
Yeah.
So how did they even stay up there safely with all of those problems?
Troubleshooting in space is a whole different thing than it is on Earth. They had to really rely on ground support, running diagnostics, working through these complex procedures to try and stabilize the Starliner and, make sure it was safe for the astronauts to stay inside.
That must have been very tense for everybody involved. So how did they finally decide to bring Williams and Wilmore back? Why not just, fix the Starliner and let them come back in that?
Well, after looking at all the risks and the logistical challenges, NASA decided that it would be safest and most efficient to just integrate them into a regular crew rotation with a SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule. Bringing them back earlier on a separate mission would have been really, really expensive, and, it would have messed up the schedule for other missions.
Yeah, that makes sense. But
Yeah.
wasn't there also an offer from SpaceX to like bring them back earlier?
There have been claims about that Elon Musk, the CEO of SpaceX, has said, especially on X, that he offered to speed up their return. But he said the offer was refused for political reasons.
Wait, political reasons?
Yeah.
That's where it gets interesting.
Yeah. Right. Musk is even claiming that he made this offer straight to the Biden White House. But a former high-ranking NASA official has denied that. But it's important to remember that it's usually NASA that makes the calls about crew assignments and space station logistics, not the White House. Steve Stish, he's the manager of NASA's Commercial Crew Program, and he said that they never even considered speeding up a SpaceX mission just to bring them back sooner because it didn't make sense logistically.
So we have some conflicting statements here. It sounds like Musk is saying something different from what NASA's saying. But let's not forget about, another big player in all of this. Former President Donald Trump, he made some comments too, didn't he?
He did, yeah. He pretty much echoed what Musk was saying, accusing the Biden administration of, abandoning these astronauts. And it basically turned this whole routine crew rotation into like this political football. And it really makes you wonder how much of this was actually about, the astronaut safety and how much was just political maneuvering.
Right. It's a great question. And it makes me wonder, how the astronauts themselves feel about all of this. What have they said about this extended stay? Were they really stranded like some of the media is saying?
Yeah, I mean, with all this political stuff going on, we got to remember that Williams and Wilmore are like, you know, highly trained professionals. I mean, they've spent months living and working in like the most extreme environment imaginable.
Right. It's easy to forget about that when you're caught up in all like the headlines and the news.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
kind of lose sight of like the human element.
Exactly. These are people that dedicated themselves to this mission, and it was a test flight on a brand new spacecraft. I mean, they faced, technical setbacks, the extended stay, and just the media constantly talking about them, and they still, stayed focused and committed.
Now, let's be real for a minute. Being an astronaut on the ISS, even on a good day, is not a walk in the park, right? You're dealing with microgravity limited space, and you know that you're like hurtling through space miles above the Earth.
And in this case, they had the added pressure of knowing that people back on Earth are, debating and politicizing their situation.
I can't even imagine what that must feel like to have like your every word, every action, like
Yeah.
scrutinized and interpreted, through this political lens.
Yeah, and through it all, both Williams and Wilmore, they stayed positive. They talked about how much they enjoyed being in space, their dedication to the mission, and how confident they were in NASA's support.
I remember Williams even said that the ISS was her happy place,
Yeah.
which I think that just says a lot about their character and their professionalism.
Totally. It really shows their resilience and how much they're committed to, the bigger picture of like advancing our understanding of space.
So let's kind of switch gears for a second and talk about some of the things that Williams and Wilmore accomplished during their time on the ISS.
Yeah.
What were some of the highlights of their mission? What really stands out?
Well, for one, Williams actually became the commander of the space station while she was up there, which is a huge responsibility. She was in charge of like the safety and the well-being of the entire crew, and she oversaw all the research and the operational tasks that they had to do up there.
That's impressive. It makes you realize that, being an astronaut isn't just about flying a spacecraft. It's about leadership and teamwork and this deep understanding of science and technology.
Yeah, for sure. And let's not forget about all the research that they did. I mean, they were literally living in a microgravity environment. That's a unique lab that allows them to do experiments that you just can't do on Earth. So they were involved in studying how space affects the human body, observing Earth's climate and environment, all kinds of stuff.
That's incredible. It's really amazing to think that, their work is going to help us learn so much and, benefit humanity for a long time.
And every mission, even the ones that seem routine, they build on the work of the people that came before them. It's this, ongoing journey of pushing the boundaries, learning from each experience, and like paving the way for, future exploration.
Speaking of the future, this whole thing with Williams and Wilmore really brings up some interesting points about, how space travel is changing. We're in this time now where commercial companies like SpaceX are playing this much bigger role alongside, government agencies like NASA.
It's a really interesting shift, and it definitely has its own, complexities. On the one hand, this partnership lets NASA focus on more ambitious goals like, exploring deep space while these commercial partners handle, taking people to and from low Earth orbit.
But like we've seen, in this case, it also brings in new variables, especially when you have like these big personalities like Elon Musk. The line between business and science and politics, it get pretty blurry.
Yeah, it raises some important questions like, how do you make sure everything's transparent and accountable when you have all these different people involved with their own priorities?
Right. And how do you deal with public perception when something goes wrong or when things get politicized?
Those are really crucial things to think about, especially as space travel, becomes more accessible and commercialized. It's something we need to be talking about if we want space exploration to have a responsible and sustainable future.
This deep dive has been so interesting. It's amazing how something like a crew rotation can turn into this really complex story with all these different layers.
It shows how complicated space exploration really is. It's not just about rockets and science. It's about people and politics and what it means to make progress.
Totally. And that brings us to, our final thoughts on this whole thing. What does this all mean for the listener? Why should you care about this space drama if you're not an astronaut or a politician?
I think it's easy for people to think of space travel as, something that's like way out of reach, something that only like a few people have to worry about. But the truth is that it's a lot more connected to our everyday lives than you might think. Yeah, think about it. Like space exploration, it shows, who we are as humans, like our need to explore, to push boundaries, to learn things, beyond our planet. It's about challenging ourselves and, trying to make progress.
But it's also about, the challenges that we face, right?
Yeah.
Like figuring out how to manage resources, balancing different, interests, making sure that the benefits are shared by everyone, not just,
Yeah.
a small group of people.
Right. And, this story that we've been talking about with Williams and Wilmore, staying on the ISS for so long, it really shows all of that, in a really clear way. We see these amazing things that they accomplished, yeah, the engineering, the human courage, but we also see like, the political stuff going on and the questions about, who's responsible for what.
Like that whole debate about
Yep.
whether SpaceX should have brought them back earlier. Like it
Wow.
sounds really simple when you first hear it, but
Mhm.
there was so much more to it.
Exactly. You have to think about the safety protocols, which are, obviously the most important thing. And then there's the budget. Launching a whole separate mission is not cheap. And then there's like the impact on other missions, the international partnerships. Everything in spaceflight is connected.
And then you add in the politics.
Mhm.
People saying that the astronauts were abandoned, accusations going back and forth. It makes you think, were they really worried about the astronauts or were they just using this as part of some bigger political game?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, this is where critical thinking is really important. When you hear these stories, you have to step back and look at them closely. Ask yourself, like, who benefits from this story being told this way? What are they really trying to do?
That's such an important point. We're constantly getting information thrown at us, especially with these big news stories. It's so important to be, careful about what we believe and to really think critically about the stories that we're being told.
Yeah, because space exploration, as cool and as advanced as it is, it's still a human thing. And that means it's always going to be affected by, things like politics and economics and ambition.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah.
What do we want them to, remember from this whole conversation?
I think the main thing is the space exploration. It's more than just, fancy rockets and pretty pictures. It's a way for us to see, who we are as humans. It's about pushing boundaries, but it's also about understanding those boundaries, the challenges, the choices that we have to make along the way.
That's a great way to put it.
Hmm.
And I think, this story with Williams and Wilmore, it shows us that the choices we make, even way out in space, they can have real consequences back here on Earth.
Yeah, for sure. So, next time you hear about a space mission or a rocket launch or some new discovery, don't just, accept it without thinking. Dig a little deeper, question what you're hearing. Consider the different sides of the story.
Because, in the end, the future of space exploration and maybe even our future as humans depends on people like you, being informed and being engaged. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.